This time we mark Remembrance Day with the tale of BSA's WM20. Now before we start, don't forget to like and subscribe, it really does help us create future content. Now a story linking BSA to wartime seems an inevitable one, doesn't it? BSA means Birmingham Small Arms after all. The company had started as a cooperative of gunsmiths in Smallheath, Birmingham. In the 1880s they'd begun making bicycles, just to give the factory something to do when the British government did something rather inconsiderate like not declare war on somebody. Unsurprisingly, with the growth of the British Empire, business was pretty good, and at the turn of the century the company began to experiment with fitting power units to its bicycle frames. They built their first bike with a Minerva engine in 1903, but it was not until 1910 they actually produced machines in any number. And then of course came the First World War. The BSA factory went back to its original purpose and began to produce vast numbers of firearms. But during the Great War the motorcycle really did come of age, with machines such as Douglas and Triumph's Model H, the trusty Triumph, becoming popular favourites, and of course Clino motorcycles were used as machine gun carriers. By the end of the war the British Army had made greater use of motorcycles than any other combatant, and the Triumph Model H was by far the most common motorcycle seen on the battlefield. But for BSA the war had been very lucrative indeed, opening a large extension to the BSA factory, from which in the post-war period vast numbers of machines began to appear, including the 500cc V-twin used by the Army in the interwar years. Then of course came World War II. There is an awful lot of misconception about World War II. We generally seem to feel that German equipment was somehow better, and that the German army was more mechanised than the Allies. The truth, however, is rather different. In fact, the German army was not nearly so mechanised as the British. They simply lacked the materials to build things in large numbers. And those large massive tanks and other equipment were often just vanity projects, which said more about Hitler's obsession with bigger is better than it actually did about the capability of the vehicles. In reality, building huge machines like this, when you don't have the materials to construct them, or even the fuel to power them, makes no sense at all. And it's very noticeable that post-war the German army built much lighter, more nimble tanks such as the Leopard. And then of course, there's the matter of motorcycles. The German army made great use of sidecars with BMW and Zundap powered machines attached to them. And the BMW is by far the more famous today, but the German army actually preferred the Zundap. Initially these machines were indeed quite influential, with the Soviets purchasing a license to build the side-valve version of the BMW, and Harley-Davidson being tasked with the development of an American version. And in the early days the BEF would make use of sidecars just as they'd done in the First World War during the Battle of France, but the advent of the Jeep would see them drop out of use. For the British Army, the main use of the motorcycle was as a dispatch carrier, and all British forces would deploy huge numbers of dispatch riders during the war, including incidentally my grandfather, who would carry dispatches during the North African campaign. And it was as early as 1935 that the British government sent out a specification for a dispatch rider machine capable of on and off-road transport. And it was to meet this specification that BSA's designer Val Page would develop the M20 in 1936. The machine was submitted to the Home Office for trials and failed, with the machine falling short in a number of areas on evaluation. Undeterred, BSA would redevelop the machine as a road-going bike, mainly for sidecar use in 1937. BSA, however, would press on and redevelop the machine, improving the rapid engine wear which had been noted on test, and making improvements to the chassis, resulting in a more robust overall machine with a little more ground clearance. And so the machine was resubmitted for trials in 1937, and would this time pass, although admittedly only just, leading to the purchase of a small batch of machines in 1938. And there's no doubt that the BSA M20 was not the most sophisticated of all Britain's machines. It was heavy, bulky and slow, and still had limited ground clearance. It was far from ideal and barely met the specification required. But on the plus side, the machine was rugged, generally reliable and easy to repair in the field, a very important quality in any machine used in war. With the outbreak of war in 1939, BSA's huge production capacity would lead to the M20 becoming the most numerous of all British machines. And in fact it was by far the most numerous motorcycle used throughout the war by all sides. In fact, by the end of war, BSA had produced 125,000 WM20s. That's more than 5 times the number of machines produced by BMW. For military use, the machine featured a large spiked prop stand, and on the top of the fuel tank sat a large air filter, especially useful in desert conditions. This modification would require that some of the fuel tank had to be cut away to make room for the hose. So this was not a modification carried out universally, but more when conditions required it. At the front was the now ubiquitous large headlamp with a blackout deflector, a device really intended to make riding at night as dangerous as possible. Other changes would be forced on by circumstance. From 1942, rubber became much more scarce. As a consequence, foot pegs were changed to metal, and the twist grip rubbers were replaced with wooden items. The M20's motor is a simple single-cylinder side-valve air-cooled unit. It has a bore and stroke of 82 by 94, resulting in a 469cc capacity. Compression ratio was a lowly 4.9 to 1, and peak power was claimed at 13 horsepower at 4,200 rpm. Top speed, somewhere around 60, but only on a very good day. Given the machine's intended use, this really wasn't a problem. At the bottom end were two massive flywheels, and with the low compression ratio, this meant the machine had an awful lot of low-down torque. Once coupled to BSA's standard 4-speed box, the machine could cruise comfortably at around 45 to 50 miles an hour, which was the speed at which military convoys operated. The M20 was deployed by most branches of the British military, so paint schemes can vary quite considerably, with some machines even adding camouflage paint to the engine, the saddle and tyres. In the field, the machine proved reasonably effective. It certainly wasn't fast with that side valve engine, and in common with all side valves, it could get very hot under the collar if you pushed it too hard. But then side valves are also mechanically much more quiet, a handy skill when you're sneaking around in a war zone. And its ability to be serviced easily in the field is something which cannot be underestimated, and this is certainly one area where an awful lot of German equipment falls very short. Basically, you don't want a machine that's complex and fussy. You just want something that bloody starts when you need it to. After the war, huge numbers of these machines were sold off for use by the general public, where they were mostly used for sidecar haulage. These would prove extremely popular, so much so that in 1955 the machine was superseded by a larger 600 version, the M21. And this machine would soldier on right through until 1963, and even after that it was still available as a special order should you want it, and would remain so right up until 1971. So BSA's M20. It's certainly not as glamorous as the BMW, but given the numbers produced and the role it played, in many ways it's a much more important machine, and one that perhaps deserves a bit more credit today. Hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, don't forget to like and subscribe, and of course, thank you very much for watching.